Shalom Uvracha. This evening, with the help of God, we study Parashat Metzora, the weekly section of Torah study of Parashat Metzora, studied throughout the Jewish communities worldwide this week. And I would like to discuss an idea related to the theme of Metzora, generally translated as leper, or something related to the concepts of leprosy, not necessarily to be confused with what we call in modern medicine leprosy. But the Metzora, the leper, various forms of leprosy are discussed in our section. And the term that's used is nega tzarat. For instance, if you look at chapter 14, verse 34, Ki tavo el eretz Canaan, asher ani noten lachem lahuzah. When you enter the land of Canaan, you enter the land of Israel, v'natati nega tzarat. There's some kind of level of nega tzarat, some kind of plague of leprosy. I find it fascinating that the Zohar, which is the main work of mystical Jewish tradition, picks up on the word nega, nun gimel ayin. And if you rearrange the letters of nega, you have the word oneg. Oneg, which means a form of delight. And the holiday, the holy day, most closely associated with oneg is, of course, Shabbat. V'karata, as Isaiah writes, V'karata la Shabbat, oneg, right? You shall proclaim Shabbat as a day of delight. The Zohar teaches that there's some type of connection between nega and oneg. That some form of disassociation with the levels of celebration and delight of Shabbat, God forbid, can bring about the opposite effect, the opposite of blessing associated with the concept of nega. And in the Hasidic literature, this idea has been expanded. This idea has been expanded and developed to teach that one of the greatest ways of fighting any form of nega is through oneg. That through the concepts of the celebration of oneg, through the concepts of dedication to the oneg Shabbat, to the glories and delights of the Holy Sabbath, we will be able to remove any concepts of nega from the world. Because it seems that if we study the root causes of Metzora, the root causes of Tzarat, according to many rabbinic traditions, it is connected to the concept of negative speech. It is connected to the concept of what we call in our literature lashon hara, an evil tongue, an evil speech, a negative speech, disparaging comments, teachings and sayings and statements about others which are derogatory. It seems that lashon hara means you use your speech to cause jealousy, to cause hatred, to cause divisiveness. It can be suggested, based on the Zohar, that Shabbat is the antidote of lashon hara. That maybe whatever the representation of the Metzora is, whatever we're talking about in terms of the concept of this entire section, a very important section to ponder, and there's a vast literature on Metzora. If Metzora is connected to the concept of speaking in an improper way, the proper form of speech, the proper form of statement is connected to the beautiful statements of Shabbat. One of the mitzvot of Shabbat, one of the commandments of Shabbat, is to use our speech. Zachreu b'dvarim. You're supposed to mention Zacharat Yom HaShabbat. You're supposed to mention Shabbat. We all say, especially we all proclaim beautiful proclamations on Shabbat about God, about creation. Maybe the loving speech of Oneg Shabbat, the loving speech of the glory of the Sabbath, is the opposite of the nega. The Oneg of Shabbat is the unifying factors of Shabbat. You know what Tzarat is all about? You know what the Metzora is essence is breaking everything apart. It's tearing everything into so many forms of divided elements. You know what Shabbat is? The Zohar, which is read and recited in many congregations. Anyone praying Nusach, Sfarad Hasidi, not the Edot HaMizrach, but the Hasidic Nusach Sfarad. So, in certain communities, on Friday night after they recite the Psalm of Shabbat, in many communities they recite the second chapter of Masechet Shabbat. They study Bameh Madlikin, Bameh Madlikin. What's the matter, Leo? What? In many communities they say Bameh Madlikin. In certain communities, instead of saying Bameh Madlikin, they recite a section of Zoharic teaching, a section of the teaching of mystical tradition connected to Shabbat. And if you've ever read it, if you've ever said it, if you've ever studied it, it speaks there about the secret of Shabbat. Razad the Shabbat, Razad the Shabbat. There's a certain secret of Shabbat. What's the secret of Shabbat?
Shabbat.
What?
Shabbat.
Shabbat. What about Shabbat? It's the koach of bringing everything together, of unifying the entire world, the celestial worlds, the earthly world. Everything becomes one on Shabbat. That's the opposite of Metzora. That's the opposite of Tzara. That's the opposite of Lashon Hara. Everything becoming one. The Metzora separates. The Shabbat unites. The family joins together on Shabbat. But the Metzora's speech, the speech of the leper, intends to break down family units, to separate family members. Husbands and wives, parents and children are ever so closer on Shabbat. But the Metzora, the Tzara, the person that's being spoken of in our Torah section of Metzora, one of the factors, one of the refinements, one of the forms of the rehabilitation processes of the Metzora is Badad Yeshev. He has to be in isolation. He has to be in some form of isolation. Badad Yeshev mechutz la'machaneh moshavo. Outside of the camp, outside of the regular community. Why Badad Yeshev? So there are all kinds of explanations. But the rabbis teach in Masechet Arachin that perhaps it's some form of suggestion that that's precisely what he was trying to do. He was trying to separate people. Rashi quotes part of it in his commentary. Badad Yeshev, Manishtana. Words which are familiar to us from other contexts. Manishtana Mishar to me. Why is he different? Why is this form of spiritual? Why is this form of spiritual impurity different than all other forms of spiritual impurity? Leishev Badad. Why Badad? Ho'il v'hu hivdil b'lashon hara beit ish l'ishto u'beit ish l're'ehu. Since the Metzora made so many efforts and through his speech, God forbid, separated between one person and another, even broke down families, even broke down close marital connections. Afhui badel, let him be separated and understand the concepts, the negative repercussions of separation. And Shabbat is the day of the day where even all of those forces which are not together necessarily from Saturday night to Friday afternoon, they all become one. So the Zohar's teaching about the nega and the oneg is understood. Or one of the other great writers writes about, if you rearrange the letters of Tzara'at, Sadi Reish Ayin Taf, rearrange spells one of the greatest forms of description of the concept of a spiritual holiday. One of the ways you refer to a holiday in Hebrew is Atzeret. Atzeret, the same letters as Tzarat. Is it Tzarat or is it Atzeret? Atzeret L'Hashem Elokecha, a form of spiritual celebration. It's in our hands to take Tzarat and turn it into Atzeret. And maybe through the Atzeret celebration, through the Atzeret observances, there is no Tzarat. Through the owning of Shabbat, there is no nega. And just one final comment. The Zohar writes, if you're interested, it's on page 46b in Breshit, in Vayikra. I'm sorry, Daf Mem Vav Amud Bet in the Zohar on Leviticus. It says there that it's not enough just not to speak evil. it doesn't mean we walk around and we're just silent all day. We figure out how to muzzle our mouths, and that we have fulfilled the teachings of and we have internalized the lessons of Metzora. It's not enough. It's not enough just to be quiet. And I quote, Kima de ansha, the high barnash, begin milah bisha. The same way a person will be held responsible for a negative word that he or she has recited, we have to try our best to stay away from negative speech. And that's one of the main messages of Metzora. Kach anshe, so too will be, God forbid, his or her punishment. Begin milah tava, the ka'atei day. If they had an opportunity to say a good word, it's not enough not to say bad words. What about all the good words that you could have said? Begin milah tava the ka'atei day. The opportunity to express some positive words, something nice, something encouraging, something that can build the world, something that can help people, something that can calm, something that can heal. V'yachil l'malala v'la malil. And God forbid he or she was in a position to say this good word, and they didn't say it. So often when we study about Lashon Hara, we're studying about don't say this and don't say this, and this is prohibited, that's prohibited. I find this Zoharic teaching to be essential for an understanding of this concept of Metzora. Not just to remove ourselves from negative speech, but to find the proper ways, find the proper avenues of beautiful, happy, positive, healthy, sweet, loving speech. That's the secret of Shabbat, and that's the secret of why the Oneg removes all forms of negative. Thank you so much for listening.